Welcome to the Quarter Life Lessons podcast,
a show on the relatable lessons learned on the journey to and through adulthood. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Charlia. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone. It's Stephanie from the Quarter Life Lessons podcast, here today with Stephen Ashman, a fellow guest of the show. We're going to be doing a session on a topic that I have pulled out of my hat, and we hope you enjoy it. So let's get started. I would like to know your definition of integrity.
So integrity to me is doing the right thing regardless of whether or not anybody's watching. So like my dad used to tell me, be Batman. Batman does it not for the accolades, but he does it because it's the right thing to do. He doesn't take the credit, he gives it, right? So that acting with integrity is doing the right thing without the anticipation of the praise that comes with it. And it's about saying what you're going to do by being true to your word. So doing the right thing when nobody's looking and being true to your word is what I would say.
Nice. So that's kind of along the lines of what I would have said, except a recent definition changed my mind a little bit, or at least in the nature of this episode, expanded my understanding. So, meaning of integrity, first approach is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles and moral uprightness. That's the first definition. Second definition, and this is where I'd like us to discuss, and that is the state of being whole and undivided. Something is built with integrity or something like that. I thought that was a really cool definition.
Right.
And then recently someone gave me this definition, which I would argue is kind of in line with the second one, and that is living a life that is aligned with your needs and your values when you're being someone who shows integrity to themselves.
Right, like that self-integrity.
Yeah.
Right, almost kind of a form of self-love, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to start with the second definition that you gave, and that was about something built undivided, something that is built firmly. And when you look at integrity, it is really one of those characteristics that are a pillar of who you are. So when we look at, that integrity, it is structurally, foundationally pretty solid. You can't poke any holes in there. You can't blow any hot air through there. Integrity is essential and critical as that building block of foundation. So I would tend to agree that if something is built with integrity, so like if I were to build a deck, that deck would have no integrity. No, because I have no idea what I'm doing. I have never done any workmanship in my life. But if I were to go ahead and try, I would try my hardest, but it wouldn't be built with that integrity. So I thought that is a fascinating definition. And then the third definition, technically, about being whole, really aligning with your values and principles with that integrity. And I think some of your listeners may feel that about really being true to themselves. And sometimes they feel like they have to compromise their integrity or they have to compromise their moral compass or their values based on the social scenario, maybe talking to family, maybe talking with classmates about current events. You may need to feel like you are compromising your values and principles. And that's probably a hard thing for some people to deal with. I was just having a conversation with somebody about their love for Michael Jackson and his music and how to be able to try to separate the art from the artist when it's something heinous as that. It's very hard to do. And when you look at someone that just doesn't align with your values, with your principles, with your moral compass, it is really hard to either monetarily support them or even emotionally support them. So I think that's an interesting definition that allows us to kind of broaden the perspective on integrity.
Yeah, I think when I was asked about my definition of integrity recently, which prompted this topic, I thought integrity is definitely hard to apply, but it's a pretty black and white concept, right? Honest or not.
Right.
But when you look at integrity with a wider lens, I think it is such a critical component to life. And I was really excited to kind of have that awareness recently. And you mentioned being able to separate the art from the artist. And as an individual who is recently learned that they're very good at compartmentalizing, cognitive thoughts from emotions,
Same.
I would think you could separate the art from the artist. But I think it's kind of like one of those step up, step back moments. Have you heard of that phrase?
Only in passing, but refresh my memory.
Yeah. So I love it. If you're talking about the personality traits of an introvert and an extrovert in a training setting or a team setting, you want the content of the training to be the same, but you're going to challenge those extroverts to take a step back and not share their takeaways because that is what they normally would do and they wouldn't process internally as much. And you're going to challenge the introverts to take a step forward and speak out their thoughts and perspectives because, again, they may do the internal work but not decide to take the risk to share out loud. As an extreme extrovert, when I learned about the concept of step up, step back, not only did I want to do it, and number two, I just never thought about stepping back and that I would gain perspective from the internal analysis and also create space for people that don't normally step up.
Well, I think that's the part that I really identify with is giving people that space. Because some people, like you said, we process things differently. Some of us are like crockpots, some of us are like microwaves. I am like a microwave. I need the answer now. Now, we need to do it now. We need to talk about this now. Some people take more time to process it, right? They need a little more seasoning, a little more time, a little more steam, and then they break apart a little bit easier. But I think it's important that you said that as you look at kind of this unit of self-discovery, it's important to, what are my values? What is my moral compass? What is my principle that I want to try to live by? And make sure that your integrity or your inner feelings or honesty toward your own values kind of complement that each day.
Yeah, and the reason I was bringing up, step back, I think, certainly in this case where we're saying, okay, integrity on the surface level or general understanding of the way we use the word in passing is honesty, living, doing what you say type of thing. But when you do the step up, step back, let me tell you what I think it is, but also let me internalize it. You get so much more depth out of the phrase. And you can apply it in different ways. So like you started to say it to the third definition, the way that I'm so pleased now to have an understanding of integrity, and that is the way that I show integrity to myself by spending the time identifying needs and values and then living a life aligned with that for me, to be honest and authentic to me. I don't know that I would have called that integrity before now.
Right, and you probably had a mix of feelings, kind of knew what it was, or knew that you had to be true to yourself, to your ideology, right? Our principles, right? I'm a man of principle. I have principles, but I think it's exactly. But I think it goes into a broader thing that you touch on is really about finding that for yourself, and really looking inward and having that self-awareness to understand about acting with the utmost integrity. Sometimes we look through the world through this lens of self-obsession. And sometimes we do things not for really other people, but it's for us. So we have to really check our integrity in that regard. And it stands with the old Buddhist philosophy of if you give someone a gift, it is absolutely certain that you will be happy. If you receive a gift, you might be happy. So understanding that it is really that integrity to share that light, that enlightenment, that perspective with others. And I commend you because I think that's what you're doing here on your podcast.
No, thank you. Okay, so questions. Now that we've busted open the can of biscuits on the word integrity, is integrity itself a value, would you say?
I would say honesty is a value. Because honesty is, but to me, integrity is the action. We have the awareness and the action. So I know I should be honest, but acting with integrity is actually doing it. So we can kind of intellectualize it. So I would say honesty. Go ahead.
Are you saying honesty is a value, integrity is a verb?
It is an action.
Yeah.
It needs to be seen through action. Right? It's one of those things like you talked about. It's like respect. You can't really put a definition on it, but you can see it when it's there and you can see it when it's not there. So I would say that honesty more is a value, to live true and honest, not only to other people, but to yourself. Be authentically, truly who you are. and who you want to be. And all of us are trying to find that journey, each and individual, each and every single day. But from our perspective, I would say that, yeah, honesty is more of the value or the principle, and integrity is the action.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. We touched on this, but I'll formulate the question anyway. Do you look for integrity in your relationships? So I wrote down supervisors and mentors because we're talking to a lot of folks on the podcast about kind of those early adulting years. And certainly integrity shows up in other types of relationships. But in this case, should you be looking for integrity from your supervisors and mentors?
100%. Because if they don't have integrity, they ain't mentors.
Right.
If they do not act with integrity with your best interest at heart, they are not invested in your development, then you're wasting your time. And you can be pretty quick to observe who has integrity and who does not. And when it comes to the opportunity, because to me, you talk about specifically like a mentor-mentee relationship, so much of the fabric of that relationship is built and based on trust. And without integrity, it is almost impossible to have trust, right? If you do not have integrity, and I know that you do not have integrity, I'm not going to trust you. And unfortunately, whether it is that student-teacher relationship, whether it is that partner relationship, whether it is that colleague at work relationship, it's really the opportunity for us to focus on, again, integrity is that action and actually carrying through. It's not just these words that we tend to say. But yeah, I would tend to agree with that assessment.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned that if you do not act with integrity, I will not trust you. And I would think somebody who doesn't have outright trust issues would give trust first and then maybe lose trust in a mentor or professor or supervisor who did not act with integrity. But it would be interesting to me for somebody who maybe is more guarded with their trust, that they would look for actions of integrity before providing that trust. That's interesting.
So the way I look at it is, even from the interview, from the interactions with people, if you're looking through the lens of emotional intelligence and focusing on truly empathizing with the other person, if that person across from you does not use empathetic language, is not compassionate, is not understanding, they probably don't have integrity. If they are someone who is more focused on their self-interest rather than the interest of the team, if this is a leader who takes all the praise rather than gives it, that is someone probably with not a lot of integrity. So I know, especially, it's hard from, say, an intern or somebody who's maybe more, dare I say, naive of the workings of relationships when it comes to work. You have to understand your value. And you need to find a mentor that aligns with your values. Don't try to align your values when you find a mentor and maybe we'll connect on these things. No, these are my deal breakers. If they do not act with integrity, if they do not have my best interest at heart, if they are not someone who is trustworthy, nah, I'm good. I don't want any part of that relationship.
So, just to sum it up, you need to use self-integrity to determine those values and then go and apply that lens or whatever to the mentor and make sure it's a relationship based on honesty and integrity and all of the things that you mentioned. Otherwise, I don't think you want their influence on your life from a supervisor or a mentor perspective.
No, there's actually a theory that designates that you will only get hired as much as your highest quality position. So the people that are kind of middle management will stay middle management. If you're a really good employee, you'll probably be a manager. If you're a really good manager, you'll probably be a regional manager. If you're a really good regional manager, you'll probably make your way all the way up. But if you make it to like just that one manager ring and you kind of stay there for 20 years, that's as far as you're going to get. We also need to make sure that of our own career journey and our own path, it's not always onward and upward. That sometimes it may feel like a step across, a step back, 2 steps back, how you want to look at it. But if you stay true to yourself and stay honest to yourself and know your own worth, that is part of that integrity as well, of your unique set of skill set that you bring to a particular company that no one else has in the entire world. We never want to underestimate ourselves, but when we start looking for mentors and mentees, I encourage our listeners here to ask questions. Ask questions about their character. Ask about their family, their occupation, their recreation, their dreams. Ask them those kind of questions to find out who they are as a human, right? If I ask about your family and you're really not really interested in your family or talking about your family, I have questions. I question maybe your integrity. I question maybe who knows. So do not make sure that if you're still trying to find your principles, your values, right, your code of ethics, if you will, when you find them, hold on to them and don't waver from them. And I think it's important that if you are selective in your mentee-mentor approach, that you will find people in your corner who will guide you throughout your journey because of their integrity, because of who they are as a person. Because if you find somebody with true, actual integrity, you will have a colleague and hopefully a friend for a long, long time.
Yeah, I love that. So a minute ago, you mentioned hold on to your values. This is a little adjacent, but do you think people's values change?
Yes, 100%.
Are you saying hold on to your values, or are you saying prioritize your values and assessing your values repeatedly,
Re-examining, yes.
re-examining? Yeah.
Absolutely. And reprioritizing if need be. Right? And we really need to think of what is important to us and what, and that changes over time. Life gives us different perspective and along those values, right? You're still essentially you, but you're finding out the priority of those values, right? So perhaps you put a higher value into your work, right? That was something I probably did before I had kids. But then I had kids, and it's like, you know what? Work's not really worth it. But it helps pay for these little gremlins, so I'll make it happen. Your priorities change. But I think that's a great point that you bring up to constantly reassess. And might I recommend a book, Adam Grant's Think Again. And what he pretty much talks about is, as adults, we pretty much get set in our ways, and we have a hard time questioning ourselves. And it's not that we're questioning our own values; we have a hard time re-examining them sometimes, or we have a hard time reckoning with maybe something that we did in the past. How are we able to look at that situation again if it were to present ourselves? Think of how many people in situations due to peer pressure let their values shuffle to the bottom, who don't say anything, who allow people to be bullied, who don't use their voice to speak up for others. So I do think that to have those values is one thing. To actually stand up for them and advocate for those values, that's a whole new level of courage.
New level of courage, and as we discovered tonight, a new definition of integrity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good one. Have you ever faced a challenge to your integrity, personal or professional, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, so I would definitely say when it comes to, I'm a very prideful person, right? So my integrity is very much on that priority list to me. So even when I screw up, sometimes spectacularly, I am very forthright and honest about it. Hey, that was me. I screwed up. If I had to do it all over again, probably would have done it differently. My bad. In a professional life, I've been pretty confident in knowing who I am, authentically me, and sometimes we have to be confident in who we are in order to say I'm sorry. So I don't think that I have purposely gone against my integrity, but I know I have accidentally. So it actually brings me to a story that I regret to this day. Post September 11th, I was in high school, and I remember specifically there was one Middle Eastern girl that a bunch of us picked on. And I didn't initiate it, I didn't start it, but I definitely didn't stop it. And I was a part of it. And I remember her name was Nora. And for years afterwards, it wasn't until I got to college to be like, dude, that was that was not integrity. That was not your values. And you shuffled them to the side and you did not stand up for or help that person in need. So when we look at moments like that, unfortunately we look back on our lives sometimes of, in the short term we try to think of all the stupid things that we've done that we wish that we can take back. The reality is there's far more stuff that we wish we could have done that we regret in the long run. So I would say an issue like that where I don't know if my integrity was quite formed yet. I was 16, 17, but to allow hatred and bigotry to come free flowing is not something now which I would consider a man of integrity would tolerate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. That one seems like so important. The one I was thinking about for myself is just something that happened recently at work, and it was kind of like overpromise underdeliver situation at the office, and I felt like I was being asked to do the overpromising and the underdelivering. I remember feeling so attacked. I mean, not that I put my ego completely in front of it and I took like personally sensitive. I just felt like I cannot believe I'm being asked to overpromise and underdeliver on this thing. I felt like that was a straight up hit to my integrity to be asked to do that. But the people around me kind of felt like, no, we're not over promising, under delivering. We're just going to approach this service differently. And so I know that one seems more transactional. Yours was certainly transformational, but um, they both happen, right?
I love how you talked about transformational versus transactional. However, when I look at that situation and you said you used the word attacked,
I felt like
your
you're
integrity
asking,
was being,
yes, under
yes.
attack.
And you were asked to maybe look the other way.
I just felt like it was a challenge to my value of honesty, right?
Right, because nobody likes a hypocrite. Nobody likes somebody who says
Right.
one thing and does another. But also when you talk about, your career, we put so much effort in our careers that we need to make sure that we stick to our guns in a situation like that, to use a terrible term. But we have to make sure that we're focusing on, number one, in those moments, how do we advocate for ourselves while with that conflict resolution? There are certain situations to where if your integrity is in manners of truth and decency, you're never wrong. You're never wrong when it comes up to that. So, sharing a personal story or a professional story, I used to be a branch manager at a bank, and somebody came in for a home equity and was talking to them, and they clearly did not have the capability nor the capacity to get a loan.
Mm.
Did not. Did not have the ability. Debt to income was a big issue. And so ended up having a great conversation with them, talked about opportunities to maybe consolidate some of that credit card debt. We couldn't really do a home equity, but let's maybe look at something else. And I remember my manager saying to me, well, did you get an application? Did you get an app? I'm like, why would I put in the application for the client when I know it is going to negatively affect their credit score? They are not going to be approved. I wouldn't be acting in the best interest of the client. So you're asking me to question my integrity, to put
Mm.
on a phony application. Why? So we can get a check mark at the end of the day? Is that in the best interest of the clients? Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? So it's tough at work because you want to make sure in that situation, I want to make sure that my supervisor has my back. But
Hmm.
if it's your supervisor you're going against, that can be kind of tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I chose in my situation to um take the opportunity to redesign an approach that would not overpromise, underdeliver, which was great. And I'm proud of myself and my team, and it all worked out. But when I wrote that question, that's the most recent version, in my life by the very first definition of integrity. Certainly, I think the other two more deep definitions of integrity are things that I'm personally working on. I think a lot of people want to work on. But yeah, and I did want to bring up, you mentioned something earlier, and I think it was around when you were talking about reassessing your values. And that's this concept that I love so much around intellectual humility and giving yourself the permission to change your mind. And certainly that we can make decisions based on the information we collect. Sometimes we make decisions without collecting information. Those are opinions usually. um, but that it is okay to prove yourself wrong and change your mind. And with the example I talked about at my work, with my initial response to the request was overpromise, underdeliver, but I was able to turn it into a win-win. I know those are all cliche terms, but by having intellectual humility and not being insulted by the request, I was able to say, okay, well, how can I reframe and then use that intellectual humility to actually, I think, come up with a really effective way forward. So,
I think you talk about that intellectual humility, and what comes to my mind is being curious. Right?
yeah,
Those that think that they know all the answers don't ask any questions. So they don't have any growth mindset. They're not questioning. If you think you know everything, you ain't going very far.
Right.
When we talk about that intellectual humility, it's okay to not know. And to say, I don't know. Or it is okay to say, you know what, I've held this as truth for so long. I haven't really examined it. I haven't really examined what other more studies, more information, more data I can collect, right? However, understanding that sometimes, and it greatly depends on the personality, how we make decisions. Some of us collect more data before we make that decision. Some of us think with our kind of head and just gotta go with it, right? Maybe our gut a little bit, and we just kind of go for it. But I've also heard too, when people try to collect too much data, that they're under that kind of analysis paralysis, where you're just collecting data and you can't really make a move. So sometimes I'd rather try and fail than not try and regret. And sometimes in a work setting that can be really tough, especially when your integrity is being compromised. But I know me personally, if I'm going to put the Steven stamp on anything, I want to make sure it's going to be done to the best of my ability. And I'm never going to be put in a compromised position, mainly because somebody else is maybe forcing me or trying to bully me into doing so. My integrity will not be questioned there.
That is a really good point. But I would challenge you, I suppose, to take the time and assess it from different lenses and see if it is one of those moments where you're going to jump ship or take a line in the sand. I think it deserves a multi-lens approach, not just because that's what I did, but because I think there's so much room for error. If you have the luxury of time, right? If you don't have the luxury of time, that's a little bit of a different decision-making, situation. But yeah, intellectual humility, man, important in, I think, making decisions, important in forming opinions, and that it is okay to change your mind. And also, to circle back, it's also important in reassessing those values because it's very difficult to change. So, yeah. Any last words, Stephen, on integrity?
No, I really appreciate you having me on. I think this is a great topic of conversation for people to really dive into. And when we look at things like our own internal belief system and our true values, and what I'm taking away from this is how I'm going to show integrity to myself, how I'm going to look inward for that. And maybe I look too much of the vision of integrity as kind of my relationship outside of me. But in reality, there's so much inside of me that I owe to myself by being honest and true to myself.
As always, the conversation does not end here.
We want to know your thoughts on these topics. Join us on Instagram at Quarter Life Lessons Pod to share your perspectives and continue the conversation to thrive.
Thank you for tuning in to the Quarter Life Lessons podcast. Find new episodes on Spotify, YouTube, and our Buzzsprout website.